Hello, everybody. Welcome to Not Just Any Book Club, but not really. This is the first time I am doing this. This is the books that I, Justin, of Not Just Any Book Club fame, read in September 2025. And let's get the ball rolling. I decided to do this because I wanted to share what I read, and I figured, why not? So, why not? Anyways, the books that I read in September, I read 9 books in September, 6 of them actual reading, 3 of them audiobooks, which I, of dubious quality. Me with audiobooks, it's the fact that it's convenient, works because I've got a 40-minute drive to work every day, and to and fro. So that gets a lot of the reading done. Do I get all the book? No, because, people be driving crazy where I live. This is just a new job, so I am not very aware of everything. But even when I was just driving to college and everything, it's better to get 80% of the book than 0% of the book. So keep that in mind. Vestiges from August, there are 4. I started some books in August, and I finished them in September. And there are 5 books that I started in September and finished in September. And there is 1 reread. So, before we begin, there is an obligatory podcast plug. It has a very inconsistent uploading schedule. The audio quality and quality itself may fluctuate at times, but it's all for the love of the game. And we also cover movies, because we really like content. And we've been doing this for around 6 years, with some really, really bad advertising on social media. That podcast is Not Just Any Book Club, which is really found on our main feed on YouTube, and we try to upload it to we use Anchor and Spotify for podcasters. I don't know if it's an Apple. Maybe we should try that. We don't have enough money for hosting because we do it for the love of the game. So if you want to keep up with us, maybe potentially you can hit like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell for any future uploads, and you can just keep up with us on Not Just Any Pod on Twitter and TikTok. Not like we use those. I really just use Twitter for my own things. I sometimes even forget to advertise, but if you want more of me, then you know where to find me. And TikTok, I keep on debating if we're ever going to return, but that is spyware. Maybe I might return to it, but I don't want that thing on my phone. I don't want to send my data to another country or whatever they do with it, because never mind. The TikTok algorithm, not for me. Anyways, the first book that I read this September, or one of the first books, these are not in any order, is the Iliad by Homer with a Fagle translation. This was very dense. I needed a guide for a lot of it, and I wasn't reading it like I was cheating off a high school exam. Nah, it was dense. This was reading it for my own enjoyment, really for the podcast episode that we have, because there are lots and lots of proper nouns that makes this really hard to decipher. There are a lot of descriptions and epithets of just random people in the entire war that have great dedication, and you'll never see them again. And I really just like Greek myths because I think it's very interesting. I really like how there are different interpretations of each and every pantheon, each and every Greek tragic hero or hero in war. I like the art, and really that's because of Hades and Hades 2, and some other things because it reminds me of Marvel and DC comics. But I don't know. I think even though this was hard to decipher, I think that the Iliad, Fagle's translation especially, which really emphasizes the poetics of Homer's language, or however this was written, and elevates it and makes it more poetic and exciting to read, which still doesn't really help the comprehension all the way there. Maybe I would have liked Emily Wilson's translation. I don't know. I thought it was good. And also Achilles and Patroclus, totally not the straightest crayon in the box. We'll say that their kinship stood out just a bit. One thing to note, the Trojan horse does not appear. Those Trojans do not hide on that horse and wait outside to jump out, which I thought was going to be in there, but it wasn't, because it really starts in the beginning. Not in the beginning, it starts in the middle, a few years from the war starting, and they're just kind of dropped in there, no context. which kind of makes it interesting and makes the world feel lived in. This is my kind of fantasy that I really like, and I know this is not technically fantasy, but it could be through a different interpretation. I thought that was interesting because I know that this is a series of books. The Iliad and the Odyssey, the only surviving texts. And I know that this is advertised as a precursor, as a prequel even to the Odyssey, but don't let that fool you because Odysseus is barely in this. I barely even know how it relates. So I don't know. I plan on reading the Odyssey next year because of that movie that's coming out. So stay tuned. And also listen to the podcast episode on this for more interesting discussion where Pierce definitely knows a lot more about this than me. Anyways, the next book that I read this September was The Mother Tongue, English and How It Got That Way by Bill Bryson. I really like Bill Bryson. I think he's very entertaining. I did notice some inaccuracies because I know there was one popular myth that pervaded maybe around when this book was written about how there are 99 words for snow, and that is not true because I think that was, I want to say, the racist myth. I'm not sure. I just know that is not accurate. But still, it is very entertaining to read. And you feel like you're learning because learning is fun. It's just not in school that you learn. You learn something new every day. And this one is just a very entertaining read. I also read his other books way back when, Short History of Nearly Everything, which was really an audiobook, which I really need to give that another chance. This is when anybody starts talking about the ocean, I start dying of boredom and I lose interest. So maybe reading it will improve my comprehension. And I also read The Body, Guide for Its Occupants, which really went more into the medical history rather than, the science and anatomy, which I was really excited to read about. Should have thought better before I read it. Whatever. But I'm not going to remember any of this content. If you put a gun to my head, I am not going to tell you a lot of the information that I just read. But it was fun while reading it. All right, Star Wars Darth Plagueis by James Luceno. This was my first Star Wars book ever, and I only read it because I was a big fan of Andor, which kind of opened up my eyes to the fact that, wow, the lore to this is very expansive and it's not just limited to the Skywalkers, because I'm not really a big Star Wars fan. I never watched the prequels, which I know it's kind of odd to be reading this book without having read the prequels. And I also thought the sequels were very, very bad. So reading this, there is a lot of lore. I know this is the book that people recommend you don't start with because of the fact that, it references a lot of things. This is kind of treated as the finale of the old lore before Disney eradicated that canon and made new lore. I don't know the exact details. It's just a good story, all right? There's a lot of content that kind of gets skipped over that is never explained, and I get confused, like, what's the rule 2? I know that's a big thing in Star Wars. I don't know what that is. I barely even know how Padawans and Masters work in this. It does not matter. You just enjoy for the story, and it was interesting. It doesn't reach the heights of Andor for me, but I could see why someone would compare this to Andor, of how exciting it is and how interesting it gets, because it does start off a little bit slow, in my opinion, with Darth Plagueis just going around killing people, but once Palpatine gets introduced, oh boy, it gets really interesting. And also the audiobook, I should write down the narrators for this. Next time I will. It goes crazy because they add a lot of sound effects and a lot of music, and the voice acting performances are really good. It feels really like a radio play, so highly recommend it. It's a very interesting corruption arc where instead of just having an anti-hero be the protagonist, no, it's just a villain who becomes an even worse villain who gets smarter by another villain. It's just very, very evil stuff. So it's interesting. Anyways, next one. This one kind of resonated with me. Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber, because I started a job. And throughout reading this, I read this before I even started the job, which kind of made me scared that this was going to be a bullshit job because I was unemployed. And I always thought, like, I don't care what kind of job I get as long as I have time to read. And the thing is, the pandemic made me realize this. And, having a long stretches of time where I was also unemployed. And the fact that my only job and duty was to keep myself fed and entertained until I have to go to sleep. And that was just torture. And now I kind of related to this because I always thought, like, being a security guard at night where you just do nothing and just chill and consume media would be really fun. Maybe for some people, but which the book does go into, that there are some bullshit jobs, quote unquote, that make people a little bit more happy, as long as you're not pretentious about it, as long as you have the pretense that it's not supposed to be a high class job. But there are some jobs where people work their ass off in college and they only get met with a job where it is just a glorified administrative work where they get paid to do nothing, or their tasks are done within the first 30 minutes of the job and they're just there for the next 7 hours to 30 minutes doing nothing, which I don't know. It doesn't feel very purposeful. The way that David Graeber describes all this stuff kind of shook me just a bit, as to how could this be so established in our society. So it is very interesting to read. I recommend this if you are. I guess this is like a babies versus economics book, or it describes a economics problem. I don't have a background in economics. Maybe that was a little bit disparaging, but at the same time, why not? What I'm trying to say is that I've got no background in economics, and I still found this pretty interesting. So I would highly recommend it. And if you want to be a little bit angry and sad about how this modern hellscape has pervaded our souls. Ooh, I think I skipped something. Yep, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This was a reread, and this was an episode of the podcast that may or may not have been recorded by the time that you watch this video. Anyways, this is my second time reading it, because the first time I read this was back in 2019 when I was in college, and I read it on my phone when I was getting back into reading because I didn't have a Kindle back then. So and it wasn't the best circumstances, because I really, really, really hate being on my phone. But what reignited my interest was reading Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov, which was a very interesting experimental book, which I thought was really interesting to read. And reading this now, Lolita, it's even more gross the second time around, once I noticed all the euphemisms and even more lying from the narrator, and just how disgusting and depraved this man is and how much he tries to romanticize it. And I must reiterate, because the author, and I think everyone who has actually read this book and has two brain cells, depiction is not endorsement. This is a book written from the perspective of a villain who wants to justify his actions. Even the foreword, which is a very interesting metatextual foreword because it's supposed to be a fictional book, also explicitly states this. It's like, yo, this book's interesting, but this guy is also a POS. So everybody hates a narrator. That there's no way that you can really justify it as a Taxi Driver / Fight Club / an American Psycho. He's like me for a real sort of thing. He's just kind of a pathetic coward, or just a pathetic man that lusts over the vulnerable and tries to justify it and tries to wash away any responsibility or accountability. It's disgusting. And this book really gave me the ick. It is brilliantly written. I just would hesitate to recommend it. And also, the covers. What the hell, man? I bought the vintage book cover where it has the lips. That was the only one that was available at the time where I got it. It's kind of gross. I can't read that out. Obviously, I was not going to read this book in public, but the fact that the lips cover is the one that was really only available kind of peeves me out, because it's kind of gross. Because if I know the intention is that if you tilt it on its side, it's going to look like something else with lips, and just gross. It's gross. Because Nabokov did specifically just mention the fact that the cover should be plain and not depict anything about Lolita or the girl. It should not play up the romantic angle, and I don't know. It is kind of a dent on the book, because I'm getting mixed signals. Anyways, this is still a very brilliant book that is written with beautiful language depicting something very, very evil and taboo. So I highly recommend it if you are very well aware of the content warnings, because, yeah. Anyways, another book that I read on the exact opposite spectrum was Mort by Terry Pratchett, because this book is light and funny in a fantasy world. And this is my second voyage into the Discworld series, because the first book I read was Guards, or Guards. I forgot how many times you say the word guards in that title, but nonetheless, it is my and also Side note, I really love Guards. It is my first book of Terry Pratchett, and I thought it was really funny, really poignant. I've read it twice within the same year, and it's my go-to book when I'm traveling places. It's just very fun to read, even just the random passage. It's one of those books where you can just reread it a lot at a random point, and you would find something entertaining. It feels like a giant Monty Python sketch with a bit of philosophy in it, and I think that's just really cool. Here, this is a bit of an earlier effort, which everybody recommends that you don't start with the first 7 or 8 books. This is book number 4, I believe, and it does kind of show that Terry Pratchett is kind of experimenting. I know this is probably the most fondly remembered of the early Discworld books. And there are some interesting aspects, but gonna be honest, the pacing is a little bit off because it feels like it's just not bad improv, just like stale improv. Like the story will stop just to have a funny scene rather than the funny scene enhancing the experience. Just was not really a big fan of that. But there are some moments. There are some great moments too, and there's a great ending. It feels like the great moments are fighting with the more mediocre moments. I also really like the romantic subplot in this book, and I also really like the line, "There is no justice, just us." But the one thing I gotta say is the fact that I bought this at Barnes & Nobles, and this blue cover that you see here is the one I got. The other covers are kind of bad. You see that one on the left? That's the one that is one that they are selling at Barnes & Nobles now, because it's new, and it's supposed to look like a young adult teen fantasy book, but that is not representative of anything. It's generic. Nothing about it indicates anything remotely funny, because if you look at the ones on the right, if you see the one with the art, there's lots of warm, bright colors. It's whimsy, and the horse is personified. You could tell it could be a funny book, and even on the one that I got, there's nothing that indicates that it could be horror or even a serious fantasy book. The bright color indicates that it might be funny. And the font too. I'm just noticing the font. It's a nice font. It does also indicate the tone. Basically, covers do matter, and the fact that I was able to get for $10, which is really the retail price, before they switched to the other covers, is a lucky steal. So, yeah. Anyways, The Long Walk by Stephen King. I marathoned the book, and I gotta try to like the movie a little bit better. I like almost all the changes that they made to the movie, from the movie to the book, especially removing the crowd, which I think is probably the defining feature of the movie. The fact that it feels more lonesome rather than dystopian than in the book. I also felt like the kinship between Garrity and McFree was really felt in the movie, just a little, mostly because you get to see the body chemistry and the vocal inflections, and I really like the two actors. They are very nice together. But the periphery characters aren't excellent. Like, they did Stebbins pretty dirty. Scram and Olsen get consolidated into one character, which, I don't know. I kind of wish they were there together. But still, I really like all the additions. Greer, I forgot her first name, but she's always great, and whatever she does, even that brief time she has. Mark Hamill wasn't really feeling, but whatever. He's a very minor part in the book, in the movie. But yeah, that was the one addition I didn't really care for. But like, I think I really prefer The Long Walk movie to the book. But that's all I got to say. I'll say it's kind of like a Shakespeare adaptation where you keep the same language, but if you remove the crowd, it kind of takes on a different tone. It's basically like doing Shakespeare, but with modern costumes, I would say, because it keeps the spirit of the story, but it does it in a different way that doesn't make it better or worse necessarily, just different. Make sense? Hopefully. Anyways, the next book I read or listened to was Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green, narrated by John Green. I've been a semi-Vlogbrothers fan, but I really like Crash Course because, for obvious reasons, Crash Course is Crash Course. And I read this book, or listened to it, and it was really good. I don't really have anything very intelligent to say about it, but I really do appreciate the fact that he had this anecdote about why he cares so much about tuberculosis and the fan that he had that was surrounded by tuberculosis and how he reflected upon the fact that he was in a world where tuberculosis was just non-existent, but in other poor regions there were. And how once upon a time consumption, which was the nickname they gave tuberculosis, I believe, was a disease that was beautified. The fact that so many great artists and the fact that you're more gaunt and skinny made you look better. And this was, I wouldn't say it was envied, but it was something that like people appreciated to try to slap a label on to make sure that, like, you know, they're not being punished. Until science came along and we eradicated the disease, but not really, because this disease is something that is more common among low income and families and people. I don't know. I think it was just a really, really interesting and poignant book. And also, please get vaccinated. I'm just going to leave it on that. But do check this book out. This book is really short, and the Audible credit, I didn't even use an Audible credit. It was like $10. That's great. Anyways, and it's also not very dense. It is very light, and because I don't think John Green has a science background. He's definitely more of the humanities type. So basically, it's not very dense with information, but rather the history of the disease and how it has been pervasive in shaping our contemporary times, and our modern society. So definitely check this book out, and also definitely get vaccinated, please, and get your kids vaccinated and your friends vaccinated. Just please. Anyways, the last book that I am going to be talking about is Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. I listened to this as an audiobook because everybody and their grandmother's and their mother's grandmother is what I wanted to say, has recommended this because it is this light and funny book. People on Reddit say it's addicting. And they were right about Project Hail Mary, which is the most read book of all time, but, you know, non-derogatory, because I really enjoyed that book, besides it being a very much a Reddit personified book. Well, I'm a little bit less enthused about this book than the other book, Project Hail Mary, because this was really not my thing. I listened to it a lot during my first week drive to my work, so I was able to comprehend that pretty well. The humor was a little bit lowbrow for me, and it eventually got to a point where, like, if I missed something, you know, like I locked in when I had to make a turn or something. I don't really try to go back or whatever if I miss something. This is like TV that you put on when you're bored, in my opinion. Not that it's bad, because this book doesn't, the title kind of reveals itself. It doesn't try to aim to be anything that it's not. There is a bit of an emotional core, which is surprising, but doesn't overdo it. And I don't know, it commits to the bit, is what I think. Also, the audiobook narrator, I think, is also really good, because he does all the voices and he commits to making every single voice sound distinct. So that's also really neat. So it really just makes for good background listening, because it is very dynamic. But I probably wouldn't be reading this. I probably wouldn't be enjoying it if I was reading it, and I probably wouldn't be continuing with the series, because I'm not gonna say it's objectively bad, or the fact that it's just so silly. The fact that, you know, I'm not gonna read anymore, or I'm gonna denounce the entire lit RPG genre. I think it's just good. Like, it's fine, but I was not enthused. I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's not my thing, and if it's your thing, good for you. I'm not gonna judge anybody for enjoying it. So yeah. Wow, way to end on such an unenthusiastic note here, but yeah. Anyways, next month, October, it's spooky month, so I'm gonna be trying to read more horror. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is gonna be the podcast episode, so keep a lookout for that. We're doing it because we really want to watch the Guillermo del Toro adaptation of it, because apparently it's supposed to be more book accurate. I don't know any of the information about it, but apparently that comes out in November. So I don't know why. It could have been capitalizing in the October stuff, but whatever. And I also plan on reading a little bit more Stephen King. I do have It in 11/22/63, which, you know, that's a November book because it takes place in November, and It is really long. I want to get used to my new schedule before I can commit to a longer book and make sure I get that work-life balance. But Stephen King, he's too prolific for me to ignore. So I will definitely be checking him out now that I have more time, or really no obligations. I don't have a big exam or to study for or anything like that. So, this is welcome to adulting. But yeah, those are the two books that I plan on reading. Again, anything can happen because there's a lot more audiobooks. Maybe I might not even get to Salem Slot. Maybe I will forget to even upload Frankenstein, or we just go like, we don't have anything to say about Frankenstein, because we've done that before. We don't want to force an episode. We've never done that. We've never done that ever, or at least in a while. But anything can happen. Anything can happen. Hopefully, the next podcast or PowerPoint episode will go a lot more smoothly, because hey, you guys have visuals now. Isn't that neat? But yeah, I feel like I should have an ending. I don't have an ending slide, and I usually say goodbye Prometheus, but that is something for the podcast. Au revoir.